we find many times Edom, who is the counterforce to Yaakov, as he was designated by Yitzchak, their father, Hakol Kol Yaakov Yadayim de Esov. The voice is the voice of Yaakov, and the hands are the hands of Esov. And there's the famous Midrash in Echo, in the introduction to Echo, where there were two great philosophers, Gentiles, and the nations of the world came to consult with them. Are we able to destroy the Jewish people? So they had said that if you go to the shuls, in the ancient days, children, they would be brought by their mothers to the shuls, and that's where they were taught. And you'd go to the Batei Medrash, to the study halls. If you'd go to the shuls and you would hear the chirping of the children studying Torah, and the men, the voices of the men studying Torah in the Batei Medrash, you cannot in any way harm them, because Yitzchak had said, "Hakol Kol Yaakov Yadayim de Esov," that as long as the voice is the voice of Yaakov, the voice representing Torah and Tefillah, Esov is not empowered. But if you go and it's silent, you don't hear the chirpings of the children and the voices of the men studying Torah, then you're dying to Esov. Then the hands are the hands of Esov. Esov is able to destroy Yaakov. That's what they responded. So Yitzchak had given a classification. What does Yaakov represent? He's represented through his voice. What is voice? What we call dibur, speech. That's Torah and Tefillah. And Esov has no relevance to that. His power lies in his physicality, his physical might. Except that physical might only gets the upper hand if the Torah is not present and the Tefillah is not there. We read recently when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go through the Edomite territory, and Moshe tells him how they left Egypt and how they prayed and how Hashem said a malach, meaning himself, and spoke about the schus avos, the merits of the patriarchs. It says, Vayetze Edom, the cross of Becherev. And Rashi cites the Midrash. You're priding yourself in the blessing you received from your forefather, that you're paralyzing your words. We also have a bracha. We have a bracha, al char b'chotichya, that we live by the sword. Because this is what Yitzchak had said to Esau, al char b'chotichya, you will live by the sword. However, we find in last week's parsha, and earlier also, Rashi cites Chazal, that what is the craft of the Umas Olam, of the nations of the world? Cherev, al char b'chotichya. And the reason why Bilam, the Torah makes it a point, he was killed by the sword, to tell us that since he had taken the craft of the Jew, which is the words, speech, to curse us, we took his craft, which is the cherev, which is sword, and we killed him with his craft. Therefore, the Torah makes it a point that Bilam was killed b'chorev. So the persona of the non-Jew is represented, the profile, through the sword. It's not limited to Esav. So when Esav all along, like a Kabbalah Torah, Hashem offered the Torah to Edom, and they said we can't accept because we have a brocha, al char b'chotichya, it was a misunderstanding. Because we see here clearly that al char b'chotichya is not something which is unique to Esav. This is the profile of every Gentile. And the profile of the Jew is Hakol Kol Yaakov. So the whole thing was really a misunderstanding. Esav, when he received the quantification, al char b'chotichya, he thought that's a bracha. But factually, it was a classification. It was a classification. Yaakov is Kol Kol Yaakov. His power lies in his speech, and your power lies in your physicality, in your might, which is the characteristic of every nation of the world. But he took it as what? As a bracha. And therefore he rejected the Torah, Kabbalah's Torah for that reason. And when he came against us, when he threatened us, he said, I also have a blessing. It wasn't a blessing, it was a classification. So what I was thinking was this. We've mentioned many times, name of the Chofetz Chaim, he cites the Targum Onkelos, that when the Torah tells us that when Hashem created Adam, Vayipach Bap of Nishmas Chaim, he blew into his nostrils a soul of life, Vahil Nefesh Chayo, and he became a living species, a living entity. The Medrash tells the the Targum Onkelos says he became a speaking species. And we mentioned this last week, that where does the power of speech emanate from? It emanates from the neshama. Every other sense of the person emanates from the physicality. But the ability to speak, that emanates from what? From the neshama. And therefore it says, when he blew the soul of life through his nostrils, he became a living species, he became a speaking species. So we explained, what does that mean? So we explained, we quoted Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara tells us in Eruvin that Bruria, the wife of Rav Meir, she was walking through the Beis Medrash, and the wife, Bruria, was the daughter of Hananiah ben Trajon, who was one of the 10 martyrs who were killed by the Romans. And she sees this young scholar studying, and he's not verbalizing the Torah. He's not enunciating the words. And she reprimands him. He says, you realize you're wasting your time. Because the Pasuk says, Chaim hi lemotzeim, that when you study Torah, it gives life to those who find them. That's literally what it means. However, she says to him, the word motzeim means lemisha motzi b'peh. Torah brings life to the one who articulates it. The impact and the effect of Torah is when you verbalize the words. But if you just meditate them without verbalization, it doesn't have the effect that it could have. So therefore, you have to verbalize it. You have to articulate it. So we explained then that why was the power of speech endowed to man initially? Adam originally was endowed with the power of speech, because what is the objective of creation? The objective of creation is Bereshis bara Elokim Eisa Shamayim V'Oretz, for the sake of Torah and for the sake of Klal Yisrael. That's why the world was created. So since Torah itself has to be verbalized, that's why Adam was endowed with power of speech, because that's the way it has its effect. Adam originally, his classification was Adam. When he ate of the tree of knowledge, the Eitz of Das, he was disenfranchised and he was no longer Adam. That ability, his neshama became limited, stunted. We, as a result of descending from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they retook that position and we became Adam. So now the power of speech has relevance to us. But initially, Adam was endowed because that was his objective. That was his ultimate purpose. He's no longer that. We became Adam. But now the power of speech is essential for our spiritual development to impact on ourselves. And this is what I want to say. In terms of ourselves, we're physical beings. All our inclinations are what are physical. The only thing that could really create this power base or this ability to deflect the physicality is only the Torah itself. Because the Torah is the ultimate spiritual, that's the soul. So it's a tug of war between the soul and the body. The body represents what was affected by the evil of the Eitz Hadas, and the Torah is the ultimate, and that's what the Gemara says, Barasi Yitzhara, Barasi Torah Tavim. I've created the Torah, I created the Torah as its antidote. Now, when a person goes and articulates the words of Torah, what does that do? That's something which is totally spiritual. That expression spiritualizes the physicality of the person, because it's not a physical sense. Speech is what is an expression of the soul, because it's an expression of the soul and you're expressing it through your physicality. Those words spiritualize the physicality. As a result of that, that blunts the inclination, and that's the antidote to the Yetzer Hara. Barasi Yitzhara, Barasi Torah Tavlin. That's the Tavlin. That's the antidote to it. Therefore, when we study Torah, now, this is the point. So I asked the question, you put on tefillin, there's no verbalization. Eat matzah, there's no verbalization. It's a physical act. But the Gemara tells us in Kedushin, Godla Talmud, Shetalmud Mevi Maseh. Great is the study of Torah, because when you study Torah, that brings to the actualization of the act, of the mitzvah itself. So there's a direct linkage between Lilman Amnas Lasos. When you study, You study for the sake of actualization. So therefore, when you're actually doing the mitzvah, there's a linkage between the act and the study. So since the basis for the action, which is physical, is rooted in the study, which is the expression of the neshama, therefore, automatically, that action takes on a spiritual value. It's just not a mundane physical action for that reason. Because it's all linked to what? To the Torah itself. As a result of that, that's the reason why the Torah itself has that degree of effect on the person that spiritualizes the physicality. And that's the Kol Yaakov. And therefore he says, it's interesting, the Gemara says in Chulin that when a predator animal sees a human being and kills the person, it's based on a pasuk in Tehillim, what he sees is another animal. But if the animal sees the human being, there's an aura, and the animal could see an aura of the human being that does not look like an animal, and only the animal sent, the animal will not attack the human being. It's only if the animal sees the person as an animal, as a physical being, that's when the animal attacks the human being. But if it sees the aura, which has to do with the spirituality, it will not attack the animal. It's the same idea. The physical action that we do, if we're doing it because of what? Because of the Torah study we have, that's a direct expression of what? Of the neshama. That's Lilman Amnas Lasos. When you Lilman Amnas Lasos, the study, that's Godla Talmud. Talmud maybe Limaser, there's a famous word from Rabbi Shol Salanta. Rabbi Shol Salanta says that if a person's weak in any area of mitzvah, you should study that area of mitzvah. Why? That since it says that the Torah itself is an antidote to the Yetzer Hara, to the evil inclination, and it's Lumen Amnas Lasos, it says, Godla Talmud Shatalmud Limaser. When you study the Torah, within the Torah, it gives you the ability to take charge of your life to do the mitzvah. So if you feel yourself in any way weakening regarding any mitzvah, what you should do is study that mitzvah. And when you study that mitzvah, that will empower you to contend with all the reasons why you should not do the mitzvah. Again, because because the Torah itself, to study is the neshama. That's spiritual. So the spiritual is spiritualizing the physical. Once you do that, then you're able to do the action. And that's Godla Talmud, Shatalmud, maybe Le'maseh. Moshe had a speech impediment. And especially now we're saying that the articulation of Torah is so crucial, of course, especially speech is the expression of the neshama. So why did he have that initial speech impediment? Firstly, why was Moshe the only one qualified to receive the Torah? So we'd said in the past, we find that when Hashem communicated the Torah in the Mishkan to Moshe, the beginning of Vayikra, what was the audibility, the sound of the Torah? It was the same sound as at Sinai. As the Ramban explains, the Mishkan was a replication of Sinai, and anything communicated to Moshe in the Mishkan was the equivalent of what being communicated at Sinai. And just as Sinai, the sound was loud enough for 600,000 men above the age of who were able to hear the voice, Moshe Rabbeinu was given over with the same level of audibility. But why? Moshe Rabbeinu is an individual. Why do you have to give it for 600,000 people? You need that level of audibility. Moshe Rabbeinu is one individual. So we explained then, the Torah was given to Klal Yisrael. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one qualified to receive the Torah. Moshe's neshama was the equivalent of the total Jewish people. He was the totality of Jewish people. So when the Torah was given to Moshe, it was given to Klal Yisrael. Because his neshama was the equivalent of the neshama of all Klal Yisrael. And from him, it was communicated. That's why he was the conduit for the Torah to be given to Klal Yisrael. Now the Torah itself is compared to mayim, to water. Now water takes on all kinds of forms. What's water? Water, if you leave it in a low-lying area, it spreads. It's a limited area, it rises. If you freeze it, temperature-wise, turns to ice. If you heat it, it vaporizes. So whatever you do with it, it takes on that form. And that's the essence of Torah. What's the essence of Torah? The essence of Torah is all based upon the person. You study the Torah, the Shema, it takes on one level in terms of its innate value. You study it Shlo Lishma, it's another value. You study it with reverence, it's another value. You study it with love, it's another value. So Torah itself is not set to be one thing. It can take on many forms, the Torah itself. Now, the speech, Moshe Rabbeinu initially, if you would, therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, if he would have had perfect speech, that meant that people say that's his physical endowment, that's him. It's fixed. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. He's speaking and express it as Moshe Rabbeinu. At Sinai, he wasn't speaking it as Moshe Rabbeinu. He wasn't speaking it as a human being. There, he was endowed with the power of speech. From now going forward, his power of speech is God endowed, without a question. So everything about Moshe Rabbeinu, the knowledge that's being communicated to him, this is all God given. The Torah is God given. The expression is God given. Everything is God given. It's unrelated to himself. That's therefore pre Sinai. It's not attributed. His articulation or his oratory has nothing to do with this. Moshe, in his totality, he's a conduit for God, as it says. When Moshe Rabbeinu spoke, the Shechina spoke through his throat. It's as if Hashem was speaking through Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what it was. As a result of that, because Moshe Rabbeinu was at that level, till then, he didn't have the power of speech. All of a sudden now he speaks. Why? The answer is because he is the conduit for God speaking through him as that person who represents the totality of Klal Yisrael. Ela dvorim asher diver Moshe b'kol Yisrael ve'ever Yarden. These are the words that Moshe had spoken to the totality of Klal Yisrael on the Ever Yarden, Bamidbar, which we discussed in a moment, in the desert, Ba'arova, in the plains, Mol Suf, opposite the Suf, the reeds, Bein Purim, Bein Tofel, V'lovim Chatzeres Dizahov. I mean, Rashi will cite the Midrash that these are not locations, but the references to events which we experienced over the 40 years. So over here, if you have a Mikros Gedolos Chumash, beautiful Balaturim, Eila Dvorim, Dvorim Hadvorim, Eila Dvorim. We find the word Dvorim mentioned 3 times here. Remez, Gimel, Pomim, Nemru, that these words, the Torah was given over to Klal Yisrael 3 times. The Sinai, V'nishnu Bo'ol Moed, it was repeated again in Ol Moed. V'nishnu Barvas Moab, in the Transjordan, in the plains of Moab, before Moshe passed away again, we entered into a covenant. 3 times we entered into a covenant with Hashem. Ba'al kol mitzvah nichrasu yud vav risos b'Sinai. There were 16 covenants on every mitzvah at Sinai. Yud vav bo'ol moed. It's more sort of yud vav b'arvas Moab. So 3 times 16. Shein memches. So in totality, it was 48 covenants we entered into, which is the totality of the Torah. Uchenegdon hizirs memches pomim batorah alavodah zora. This is the Medrash Tanchuma. We find idolatry mentioned 48 times in the Torah. The laws pertaining to idolatry. So we find 48 covenants Hashem entered with us regarding the Torah, and avodah zora, idolatry, is mentioned 48 times in the Torah. Now, there's a mention on Tchuma in Parshas Yisro. Moshe initially had a question. Yisro sends a message to Moshe, I'm coming with your wife and children. If you come out to greet me, fine. And if I'm not worthy that you should come out to greet me, you should come out to greet your wife. And if your wife is not sufficient worthy, you should come out and greet your 2 children. And Moshe goes and greets Yisro. Well, Moshe greets Yisro, who follows Aaron Abanov, Aaron his children. This came to the elders and all Klal Yisrael. And as it says, that the greatest honor in the history of the world was given to 2 people. To Yaakov, when Yosef went out to greet his father Yaakov when he came to Egypt, was when Yosef went out, he was the viceroy all the ministers of Egypt went, and ministers and the cabinet and all the masses went out to greet Yaakov. Identically here, if Moshe goes, Aaron and his sons go, the Zekanim go, and all the Jews go. There's one of a level of honor. What was the question? Should Moshe go? Should not Moshe go? Now, who is Yisro? Yisro initially was what? Was an idolater. So Moshe giving that level of value to a person in the past who was an idolater, it may be processed wrongly. So that, and Yisro understood this. So he says, if you're not going to come out to greet me on my behalf, let it be your daughter's behalf, your wife's behalf, who's my daughter. But my daughter's my daughter. She's the daughter of an idolater. She's a convert. She come out in behalf of your children. So the Medrash says, Hashem says to Moshe, do you know what Yisro did? He abandoned idolatry. Idolatry is mentioned 48 times in the Torah. There's mentioned over there. And if he gave all that up to come to me, he's worthy that you should go out to greet him for his own sake. That's what Hashem said. But that's what the Medrash mentions over there. Torah is 48, and what? And Avodah Zarah, idolatry is 48. And because he abandoned that idolatry, which is 48, therefore, for Torah, which is 48, therefore he's worthy and deserving, you should go out and give him that level of honor. So over here, the Baal HaTurim is saying that there were 48 covenants, and the 48 times Avodah Zarah is mentioned in the. Now, it's interesting. We just discussed earlier, the only antidote to the evil inclination, and what's the most extreme level of failing within spirituality, is doing idolatry. So idolatry, which is the most extreme representation of evil, because that was a direct outgrowth of the Eitz Hadas, what counters that? Torah, 48. It's 48 versus 48. The most extreme level of impurity is countered by what? By the Torah, which is 48. And that's what we said in the past. We find in Pirkei Avos, in the 6th chapter, Memches Dvar MaTorah Niknas Behem, the 48 ways to acquire Torah. Why 48? Why not less or more? The answer is because, again, 48 is the number. Those are the levels of covenants we went into, the number. As a result of that, it's a representation of the Torah in its totality. So when you connect and internalize it, process it within that context, then you're able to have that antidote to withstand any onslaught as from the Yetzer Hara.
Rabbi?
One moment. We're not finished. V'hizir memches tomim b'Torah alager shaboli dovik b'Torah. Regarding a convert who comes to become a Jew, the laws pertaining to a ger is mentioned 48 times in the Torah. Hear that? Again, 48, the ger. Shenichrasu oleh memches brisos. The reason why it's mentioned 48 times, because the ger, what did he give up to become part of? Something which the 48 covenants which were entered into, which is the Torah itself. Therefore, ger, the laws of conversion or the laws pertaining to a ger are mentioned 48 times in the Torah. Go ahead, Bernie. Why there's Nun Shari Bina, the 50 gates of Bina, of understanding. Nun Shari Bina. The Ramban in the introduction to Torah speaks about this, and he says Moshe Rabbeinu came upon 49 Shari Bina. That through the Torah, you're able to come upon 49 levels of understanding. The 50th you're not able to understand. Why? Because the 50th Shar, the 50th gate of Bina, is the essence of God himself. And that's impossible for any creation to understand. Therefore, and that's what it says, he was lacking a slight degree of understanding of God. What was that? His essence. Because that's something impossible to understand, because God is infinite and every creation is finite. So to have an understanding of that, that's what he fell short of that. That's Memte Shari Bina. The Torah may be 48 covenants, to establish it. But what does Torah represent? It represents 49. Now, let's talk about it. Discussed many times, name in Morale of Prague. 7 always is a representation of what? Of creation. 8 always is supernatural. That's beyond 7. That's the reason why we find, when was Kabbalah Satorah? Kabbalah Satorah was on the 50th day after we left Egypt. We have 49, the 50th. What's Torah? Kabbalah Satorah is the ultimate supernatural. That's when we became the Am Hashem. That's when we cleave to God through the medium of Torah. So 50 is really HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's God himself. That was Sinai. God brought heaven to earth. And that's why the world wasn't able to contain God's presence. It was quaking for that reason. Because anything finite cannot contain something which is infinite. That's 50. So the Memteh Shari Tumah means within the creation capacity that maximizes on the counter to the 49 Shari Torah. 49 Shari Bina, which is a representation of Torah. That's ultimate. That's falling short of understanding God. Memteh Shari Tumah is the counterpart force against the Shari Torah. There are 49 levels of impurity represented on the other side. That's the counter, the essence of Torah, of understanding. Mem Chesov is something else. Now, yes, why? So why let it be 49 combinants? Why 48 combinants? That I'm not answering you. But it's a different concept. That's like a derivative of that. The Mem Ches has relevance to 49 levels of Bina. And Avodah Zorah has to do with 49 levels of impurity. Now you have 5 Chomoshim. You have Bereshis, Shmos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvorim. Now, Bereshis ends with a Tuf, the last letter. Ve'eleh, the first word. Eila ends with a Hey. Vayikra ends with an Aleph. Vayidaber is what is Bamidbar, first word, ends with a Reish. Ve'ela Dvorim ends with a Hey. Sof Tevis Gematria Yiras. If you add up the numerical value of all the last letters in each one of the Chomoshim, the numerical value spells Yiras. Zeu Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. What is the basis for Chochma? Yiras Hashem. Those are the words of David. The foundation, the prerequisite to Torah is Yiras Shamayim. Ubigmatria Torah. Hear this? Yiras is the same numerical value as Torah. There's a direct link between Yiras Hashem and Torah itself. As once said, we find Eila Mishpotim is juxtaposed to what? To the laws of the Mizbeach. You're not permitted to ascend the Mizbeach with steps. It has to be a ramp. So Rashi cites the Chazal. Why does the Torah juxtapose the laws of Sanhedrin to the Mizbeach? To tell us that when the Sanhedrin convenes, they have to convene in the Lishkas HaGozis. They convene in the adjacent to the sanctuary. That's Rashi cites the Chazal. That's the juxtaposition. So we discussed why. What's the reason? To be a member of the Sanhedrin, besides the Torah scholarship that he has to be at that special level, he had to be ordained through Moshe Rabbeinu to be qualified to be a member of the Sanhedrin. He had to understand 70 languages. What is the capacity of this person, genius-wise? He had to understand every level of idolatry because he has to make an evaluation. What is idolatry? What's not? He had to know every level of sorcery because if a person is a sorcerer, what we call a mechashev, he has to be judged, punished by death. So he has to understand what the laws of sorcery are. So the breadth and depth of understanding of this person, we can't even relate to. Person has that level of knowledge. This fuels the ego at a level it's not possible to understand. Is with all the genius in the world, this person's gonna be out of control. So what's the only thing that's really gonna gird this and control it? Yerushalayim. When the Sanhedrin convened in the Lishkas Hagozis, in the chamber of Scott Stone, when you were in the Beis Hamikdash, you were able to sense God's presence. When you sense God's presence, you were negated immediately. So now when you're negated and you have that level of genius of understanding and knowledge, now we're talking about coming upon truth. Because if you don't have that foundation, which is called Yerushalayim, you're a loose wire. You never know where you could go. But if you always have Yerushalayim, and that keeps you straight and narrow, then you're able to maximize on that chokhmah. Torah itself, first it's Yiras. Reishis chokhmah Yiras Hashem. Yiras is Torah. If you have Yira, we can talk about Torah. If you don't have Yira, it's something other than Torah. You may have genius, may have everything else. You have knowledge, but it's not Torah. The only way we know it's authentic, pure Torah, if it's rooted, as David says, Reishis chokhmah Yiras Hashem. So therefore, the gematria of Yiras and the gematria of numerical value of Torah is the same gematria, the same numerical value. Okay, we're just going to go a little bit further because everybody's checking out early. There's a famous Ramban here. The Ramban, he says over here, Sefer Hazeh Inyono Yudua Shu Mishnah Torah. Sefer Dvorim is called Mishnah Torah. It's a review of the Torah itself. And from Dvorim till Moshe passes away, it's 36 days. These are the last 36 days of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. And he's reviewing the Torah before he passes away. So he says, Hine Inyono Yudua Shu Mishnah Torah Varbo Moshe Rabbeinu Lodu Ludor Hanichlas Beretz Rov HaMitzvahs Atzrichas L'Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu over here is reviewing the majority of the mitzvahs which are needed for the Jewish people. Now, this is the important point. Lo Yaskir Bo Dover Mitoras Kahanim. There's no mention of the laws which are mentioned in Torah and Vayikra, Korbanos. Those laws are not mentioned. The laws which pertain to Kohanim are not mentioned in Mishnah Torah. Shragbir Osam Lehem. Now this is important. Vakonim Zrizim Hain. The Kohanim, because they do everything with alacrity, Lo Yitzchu Lasora Achasor. They don't have to continuously forewarned. You only have to say it once. It does not be repeated. Of Yisrael, but for the Jew who doesn't have the characteristic of Zrizim, of alacrity, Yazer Mitzvahs Hanogus Behem. It has to be repeated. It has to be reviewed. Pam Lohosif Ben Biur, sometimes to elucidate it to a greater degree. Pam Shlo Yazir Osan Rak Lahazir is Yisrael Barov Hasoros. Again, to reiterate it, to communicate its importance. Moshivar B'Sefer Hazeh Binyone Avodah Zorah. As regarding idolatry, Asoras Merubos Chazubo Chochos, continuously, it's being reiterated, the severity of idolatry, V'kol Pchodim Asher Yavchid Osam Cholonchi Averos. And we speak about the curses at the end of Kisovo, Hagrizim, Harevo, whatever we spoke about over there. Now, we've mentioned that famous in how do we know that if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar? The Gemara says, Rabbah says, because there's a concern that if a person is not adept at blowing the shofar, he may transport the shofar at Dalar Rabim. Okay, now, where did Chazal come up with this concern? Where does it come from? So the Gemara says the two psukim in the Torah. We find Rosh Hashanah is called Yom Trua. It's the day of the blast of the shofar, but it's also referred to as Zichron Trua, the remembrance of the blast. So the Gemara answers, ask, is it the day of the blast or is it the remembrance of the blast? Meaning you only say psukim relating to shofar? Similar answers. If Rosh Hashanah falls out in the middle of the week, then it's Yom Teruah. If it falls out on Shabbos, then it's Zichron Teruah. We don't actually blow the shofar. We only say psukim, which refer to the shofar. So there's a famous. So what is this called? This is called asmachta. It's called the rabbinic reliance. It's not the true interpretation of the pasuk. So the Ritva writes over there like this: if one would say that it originates from Chazal's concern, he says, it borders on heresy. Why? Because he says very often the Torah alludes to things which are red flags, which is telling Chazal, this is an area you have to be concerned about. That's Zichron Teruah. So they're alerting us that this concern that what? That since a person may be in this situation, he may transport Dal Am Shesarabim, therefore it's up to you to legislate offense. If you don't legislate defense, you blow the shofar even on Rosh Hashanah, when it falls out on Shabbos. However, you have to make an evaluation. It may be worthwhile to legislate that fence because people will cross those lines. Okay, that's the Ritva. So the Zichron Teruah is alerting Chazal to understand that there's an issue over here. The Gemara tells us in many locations that the innate characteristic of a Kohen is Rizim Haim. And therefore, the certain rabbinic laws don't apply to the Kohen. Of course, it's Rizim Haim. How do Chazal know? Is it their evaluation? So what I said, according to this Ramban, there's an obvious question. Mishnah Torah is a repetition of the whole Torah. So why doesn't it repeat Torah's Kahanim? The laws which pertain to a Kohen. Why only the laws which pertain to an ordinary Jew? So Ramban says, you know why? Because since from here we see, because Kohanim is Rizim Haim, they have this innate characteristic, they do things with alacrity, it doesn't have to be repeated. So how did Chazal come up with this understanding the innateness of a Kohen? It's because the Torah doesn't repeat itself. So it's the same idea. It's not something that was their evaluation. The takeaway is that since the laws of Torah's Kahanim are not mentioned in Dvorim, that tells us this is the essence of the Kohen. Therefore, it's not necessary to legislate fences for the Kohen, which we do legislate for the ordinary Jew for that reason. Okay, we're going to do Mishnah Berurah.
Rabbi,